And we are live. Nathan, are you there?
Hey, what's up? It's Nathan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How are you?
Amazing. I'm doing great.
Awesome. I'm excited to get this party started. Thanks for joining us today.
Let's do it. I'm excited as well. Thanks so much for hosting this. It's amazing to be collaborating with Skubana.
All right. So we got people coming on to the webinar. People are still joining. So in the meantime, in the chat, if people can just write where they're coming in from, perhaps even just say one, if you have imported from China or elsewhere outside the United States, and two, if you've never imported anything into this country. So where you're coming in from, and if you've imported one, if you haven't imported two. And while that is happening, as you can see, I'm feeling a little bit better than our meeting yesterday, Nathan.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you're feeling a little better here.
Yeah, it's a rough road, man.
The winter, hopefully it wasn't the flu. I mean, that can get you sometimes.
Yeah, I'm pretty holistic when it comes to like taking care of myself, so I just try to like wait it out.
Totally.
So it's like we got more people joining. We'll get started in a few minutes if that's cool. Nathan, where are you dialing in from?
I'm in San Diego, California right now at our office here in La Jolla.
Awesome. I'm thinking I'm going to this conference in San Diego coming up called Traffic and Conversions.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's coming up real quick, huh?
Yeah. You should remind me after this call. I'll introduce you to a buddy of mine who's having like a VIP dinner the night before.
Oh, nice. Cool.
So I'll make a note of it. I'm dialing in today from the beautiful state of New Jersey. Gloria, thank you for writing one. So we got one person. Again, we want this to be interactive if we can. So here we go. I think there's a little bit of a lag with Webinar Jam. So now it's starting to come in. We got Finland. We got Las Vegas. I'll be there for the Prosper Show. I think you'll be there too.
Yeah.
Right,
yep.
We got Dylan from San Diego. I think that's the right Dylan. Nope, it's not the Dylan I knew, but it's all good.
Dylan we know.
Yeah. Looks like people are importing a lot of New York one. We got a lot of ones coming in. So guys, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. You could be anywhere in the world and you can be doing anything you want to be doing, and you've chose to dial in and join us for today's webinar. So we're super grateful and appreciative of that. And essentially the idea for me and Nathan both coming on the line was to essentially just drop as much value as we possibly can. And so to get into it, Nathan, do you mind giving everyone a brief intro on yourself?
Yeah, totally. So, my background really stems in starting my own e-commerce stores. I mean, I was an e-commerce entrepreneur myself, running multiple six-figure Shopify stores and running seven-figure crowdfunding campaigns like Original Grain and LoomCube and a few other ones. And, even before that in high school, I used to live in China and with a host family that didn't speak English and attending a local Chinese high school. And that's when I got so excited by the power of these factories to produce products all around the world. So I started flipping products on eBay in 2010, about 8 years ago now. And, then ended up creating my own product through Shopify. And it was a watch strap where we invented the first leather watch strap without holes. It worked like a zip tie where you slide the strap through the buckle and it caught on notches in the strap. And as that grew and as I got more connected in the e-commerce industry, people always ask me, Nathan, how do you produce products so fast and effectively? And I realized that was a bigger problem that I was more excited about. So I started a company called Sourcify about a year ago. We're now the fastest growing sourcing platform, helping hundreds of companies manufacture products around the world. We partner directly with Shopify, BigCommerce, Amazon, and a lot of different other amazing software companies. And Skubana, of course. And so it's amazing. And Chad, tell us more about yourself as well. I'd be thrilled to learn more about your background and how you started Skubana.
Yeah. So, I've been in e-commerce now for a decade, so I'm kind of a veteran at this point. My parents owned a vacuum store when I was growing up. I'm sure a lot of people that have dialed in or listened to some webinars know my background, so I'll go through it real brief. My parents owned a vacuum store, sort of struggling to make ends meet. I never wanted to go into the vacuum business. I was first generation college grad, went on to college and to Wall Street. And after Wall Street, I got let go, and I decided to start a direct consumer company called Crucial Vacuum, selling vacuum filters direct to consumer. This is before D2C was sexy and the cool thing to do. And that was 2008. And then sort of fast forward to now, right? We had an issue where we were scaling across 20 channels, and I was trying to figure out how do we automate what human labor does very inefficiently with technology. And we started Skubana, which is an operations and automation platform for large multi-marketplace e-commerce sellers.
That's amazing. I mean, that's an incredible story. Just kind of, I think we both realized the problem that we were facing and created a company to solve that problem that we faced ourselves.
Exactly. And that's a great segue. I think that's a big part of sourcing is solving a problem. So let's dive right in. So what you're going to learn today, just to set expectations, we're just going to really wing it. We're going to spitball different ideas of what we're experiencing on the front lines of sourcing, how to pick a product, how to choose between a factory, a trading company, or sourcing agent. And then we're going to go through a few small little hacks or tactics that we use internally when we're importing. And then we'll open up to any Q&A that people have. Sound good?
Sounds great. I'm excited.
Cool. And guys, while you're watching, just to let you know, Nathan and myself both have a very interesting offer that we'll be sharing at the end. So stay tuned. And okay. So when it comes to, we were just talking about solving problems, and I wrote this book, Cheaper, Easier, Direct, and really in it, it's all about how do you solve a problem. So a lot of people just are using these bestseller rank tools like Unicorn Smasher or some of the others that exist out there, and just going to products on Amazon and saying, hey, there's good revenue here, there's good units, let's source it, let's make it. And if everyone's using the same tools, then we're all going to end up with the same product at the end of the day, right? Because we're all using those same tactics. I always say this, Amazon has over 100,000 different toilet paper holders that you can buy on their platform. No joke. So
it's crazy.
So like what I like to do, and I've kind of switched up my methodology a lot more to the use. It wasn't so ubiquitous to just everyone having these Chrome extensions. Mm-hmm. So what we changed our approach that I really have been liking is that we're going based on user demand. So what people are searching. And I have no affiliation with Merchant Words. There's other platforms out there that do this. I just use Merchant Words. And essentially, it's based on what people are actually searching into Amazon that help us create our ideas. So it becomes a pull process versus a push process. We're not just pushing more product, hucking more stuff on Amazon based on BSR. We're saying, hey, people are really searching this product. Maybe there's some a unique space that we can move into based on the search queries that are happening.
That's awesome. So I think it's a completely different approach than all these Chrome extensions that are out there, because people are really kind of, analyzing these products that are on Amazon or on these other marketplaces and then figuring out, potentially how much money they could make. Whereas you're actually taking a search-driven approach, which I think is a whole nother way of really trying to scale up.
Yep. And one of the things that we implemented internally is that we actually set up a process so that we'll never create a Me Too offering. If there's another product in the market that already exists, we're not doing it.
Got it.
That's changed from a decade ago. Nathan, that's changed from a decade ago. Like, it wasn't always like this.
Right. Well, and also too, I think, Amazon and all these marketplaces have gotten a lot more saturated in some sense with different products and their offerings. Sure. And I think the way I see companies standing out is by developing a brand, by creating that brand equity. And then you have that higher margin you can live by, because if people are willing to pay a premium for your brand, you're going to make more money. I think that's definitely something that's hard to develop over time, but it goes hand in hand with what you're saying in terms of figuring out even what products to sell next and how you can scale out to other categories.
So what's your process on picking a product?
For us, we've actually been kind of taking the same approach with trends. We think the search-driven environment is very exciting. And I think it's a complete different dynamic where, especially on the Shopify side of things, where that's really our bread and butter, we look at the way people are driving traffic, either through Facebook ads or Google AdWords. And Facebook, you're pushing content out there. It's not search-driven, whereas on Google, people are actually searching for the products that you're selling. And so it's a completely different dynamic compared to push versus pull. Mm-hmm. And so for us, speaking of different trends, like one of the coolest projects we did last year was the Conor McGregor, FU suits. He wore these suits that went viral to their press conference that he had with Floyd Mayweather. We produced those in under a week, and in the first week of sales, it did $23,000. So it was a pretty cool project where, you know, it went viral. We were on Hypebeast, The Slate, Bro Bible, all these different media outlets. And so it was much more, you know, trend and search driven rather than, you know, pumping out a bunch of ads and doing all these retargeting campaigns. So it was a different dynamic, like you're saying.
And by the way, do you see our slides?
Yeah, I can see the slides. So I'm going to go in right now to how to pick your product. It sounds like a lot of you are selling, but it always is, you know, funny for me to kind of break down how someone picks their product. And at Sourcify, you know, we get hundreds of new requests a day for different projects of products that people want to manufacture. And so sometimes I put, you know, 1 and 2 together, and it always baffles me to see people that are trying to produce products that don't really interest them. So can you go back to the last slide or the slide before? So right off the bat, interest. You know, we see, like, for example, some men that submit like women's cosmetic projects, and it's like, I don't think if you're producing or trying to sell a woman's cosmetic product and you're a male, you aren't really going to understand your customer as much, in my mind. So right off the bat, I would say interest has to be there. Number 2 would be margin. You know, I would say most e-commerce entrepreneurs that are running through Shopify are running like a 75% gross margin. I know with our watches, or even like, for example, Movement Watches, the fastest growing watch company in the world, they produce their watches for about $10.70. And so their margins are, you know, 90% gross and up, which sounds incredible. But on, you know, Shopify, you can have that margin. And especially for them, they've been able to create that brand. So they're selling that brand equity. On Amazon, it's a completely different story, and really, you know, depends on the product category that you're in. But I would say, you know, you want to focus on your margin and see if it actually makes sense to go into this product category, especially when you're just starting out with a few tests. You know, if you produce at a smaller order quantity, you aren't going to get the lower cost as if you're producing at scale. And you know, the next point I always ask is the complexity of the product. If you're going to start a completely new product, a completely custom product, you might have to buy a mold and actually, you know, spend $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 making these molds. And we saw this in very recent times. There was a, you know, with the rise of cryptocurrencies, there's companies out there that are producing what's called like crypto steel. They're like these thin steel crypto wallets. And for them to get started, the upfront cost of that mold is a lot higher than if you're, you know, producing a hat or backpack or whatever it may be. So you want to consider the complexity of your product. And that's really the 3 keys that I use to pick your product. So now moving on to the next slide, if you don't mind skipping forward. So, you know, if it's a new product, you know, there's always this kind of confusion with people asking, hey, do I want to use factories that have actually produced products similar to mine before? And for the most part, you know, the factories that have produced similar products are going to be the ones that are experts in that product category. You know, they're going to know the fabrics, they're going to know the way certain stitches should work. They're going to understand that whole process of actually putting that product together. And when quality control is you know, got to be top of mind for any e-commerce entrepreneur, you're going to want to find factories that have produced similar products. And one of the, I think the coolest ways to do this is go through Amazon listings or you know, whatever reviews you can find online and see what problems people have identified in those products, and then solve those problems in those products and create an even better product based off those reviews. And I think that's a really neat hack that not so many people think about, because look, the products are right in front of you, the reviews are public. Think about how you can make that even better. And you can even analyze that, or analyze your quality control based on those poor reviews. You know, if you're producing like an electronics product, like for example, there's all these knockoff like ear pods going around, those Apple ear pods, and you can see the different, you know, QC problems that other sellers have had on Amazon because, or just by looking at the reviews. So that's another neat trick that we use just to understand how we can improve a product.
Totally. And I'm using a lot of negative reviews in Amazon listings. So I'll look at others Amazon listings, and I'm like sorting by 1 star or 2 star. And not only does it help me on a sourcing end of things to find a problem and solve for that problem, but also I'll take a lot of those negatives and put them into my listings.
Got it. Yeah.
Another nice approach, because, you know, everyone's going to look at those negatives. And so you can flip them into your own listing and say, hey, by the way, we're going to address these up front. So by the way, there was a message coming in from Kenny. what's a good margin for Amazon? He was asking you.
I mean, on Amazon, I think it probably depends on the product category and your scalability. I mean, I would say probably average that we see is gross around like 40 to 50%, sometimes lower. I mean, it's not necessarily as high because you have other costs involved. And it's just a different dynamic selling on a marketplace like Amazon.
Yeah, it depends on what your ACOS is for PPC, because I've heard some outrageous numbers being spent out there. So if you're looking at gross margin versus operating margin, it could definitely vary, especially if you're in a commodity product or like a higher end product.
Exactly.
And speaking of higher end, I just want to point out, Amazon just came out saying that they're changing their fee structure for jewelry and apparel. I don't know if you saw this. And so jewelry,
I did, yeah.
So jewelry now, Amazon's saying, I think that they're going to take 15%, but when it goes up to $250, they're going to take a smaller cut. So I think they're trying to go more upstream and trying to add more valuable products to their marketplace outside of just, trinkets and lower end products.
Right, exactly. And I think that makes sense for their business and especially for the sellers as well. So, the next step that we're going to dive into, and I think this is one of the biggest confusions or mix-ups in the manufacturing world, is actually figuring out who you're dealing with. And when we look at companies that are at trade shows like the Canton Fair or at, on open marketplaces like Alibaba or globalsources.com, you have to understand that not all the companies that are at these booths and these trade shows or all these companies listed on these websites are actual factories. A lot of times they're trading companies or wholesalers, and there's a certain dynamic that you need to understand about these companies in order to do business with them. And the next slide we're going to dive in. If you want to move on to the next, we'll dive into these different dynamics behind those three.
Nathan, are you going to answer the big question, which is how do you figure out if they're telling you the truth or not, that they are the factory versus the trading company versus the wholesaler?
I am. So I'll actually give the trick right off the bat, which is one of my favorite. It's not, it's the best way that we found. So it's called like basically the paper trick. So you're going to be communicating with your sales reps at this manufacturer and going back and forth, trying to figure out, the cost of your product, the production timeline, all of that information. And you aren't, sure without actually going there to see, if the factory floor that they show you is theirs. But one trick that you can do, ask the sales rep to write, her name or email down on a piece of paper with the date and have her take, 5 to 10 photos around the factory floor. And you'll be able to see in those photos if the products on the factory floor actually match up with what you're looking to produce. And you can actually see then that, all right, at least this person has access to this factory. And that will give you a better understanding to actually see the inside workings of the factory. It's not, 100% always going to be right, but it is a best bet scenario if you aren't going to travel to see your factory.
So you're saying have them take a photo of their name and business card in the factory. Can you explain that one more time for me? I'm sorry.
Ask your sales rep through email or WeChat or however you're speaking to them, say, hey, I want you to write your name and email and the date on a piece of paper and go around the factory taking photos with this piece of paper in those photos. So then you can actually see that at least that person has access to that facility. And then you can hopefully also see in that facility that they're producing products that are similar to yours.
So then I would probably say, I'm getting some feedback. I would probably say that you probably do that at like 8 p.m. our time and tell them that like they have 4 hours to go do that, right? In a 4-hour time span, so that you make sure that they don't actually plan out their trip accordingly to do that.
Right. I mean, one of the biggest dynamics that you'll see at smaller factories or trading companies is that their office isn't located where the actual factory facility is. So sometimes, especially when these sales reps like to live in cities and most people like to live in city centers, their sales rep office will be closer to the city, whereas the factory, because of real estate costs, you're going to want to have it outside, 2-3 hours outside the city. And it makes for every time, you go to Shenzhen or Guangzhou or Yiwu or wherever in China. I mean, I was just there for a week and a half at our office in Guangzhou earlier this month. And, you're spending maybe 2-3 hours a day in the car, just going back and forth to all these factories. So it's, it's part of the dynamic of real estate over there and even real estate around the world. It's always going to be cheaper outside a city. And it makes sense if you're trying to have a bigger facility to put it outside a city. So that's one way. And the second way, because I know this is probably an urgent question and I don't want to, skip over it. You can ask for what's called a Chinese business license, and the companies are registered in each province, and so you can look at the top part of the business license and get someone to translate how they're registered as a company. Manufacturers and trading companies are registered different in China, and so it's if you have a friend that can speak Chinese, it's a good way to actually showcase and see their legal documents. It's going to be it's the business scope label that you can look at, and it enables you to see, how they're registered as a company. This also isn't 100% always accurate, but it is a good way to at least grasp a legal understanding of the business that you're dealing with.
That's a really good nugget.
So I can tell you in Chinese, it's called Jing Ying Fan Wei. So Jing is the flat tone, Ying is the up tone, Fan is down, and Wei is up. I can copy it and paste it in the chat actually.
And what does that mean?
It's the business scope license.
Got it. Awesome.
Yeah. And so, diving in here real quick, trading companies, these are companies that are going to take their own margin. So they make money by basically usually taking probably an average of like a 15 to 20% margin between the actual factory cost and the cost that they give you as the buyer. The whole dynamic there is trading companies will have a wide array of products. So you can go on their, site on Alibaba or whatever it may be, and they'll be producing, products like water bottles and shoes, and the products don't add up because they're stemming from different raw material sources. Like someone that produces water bottles isn't going to produce shoes because the raw material sources are so drastically different. And you go to trading, you go to fairs like the Canton Fair or the Global Sources Fair in Vegas, or ASD Sourcing Direct. I'll be speaking there just like a week, I think, actually, which is crazy. I'll send a link for that too. But you have this wide array of products when you go into their booth at these trade shows, and you're like, how do you produce so many products? That's got to give you a red flag, and you got to question that, because a lot of times these factories will put in their friends' products to say, oh yeah, we can produce this and that. Whereas for you, you want to be actually working with the factory that produces those products. The next part is there isn't always the most customization that you can do, and this really stems from like injection molds or products that need a lot of customization. Like it's very confusing. The more detailed your product has to be, the higher a chance that a trading company will mix it up, because you're communicating with the trading company, and the trading company is speaking with the factory. So you have this person in the middle that's going back and forth with both of you. And so if they mix up communication between you and the factory, then you're going to have a product that's produced that doesn't match your specifications. So it's something you got to be aware of. And even when communicating with anyone abroad or any of these factories, you always want to be clear and concise and keep your communication simple. One of the nice things about trading companies is a lot of times they have lower minimums. This can stem from their relationships with factories where they're able to batch orders together. Similar approach to Sourcify. I mean, we're able to work with lower minimum order quantities than most people because we're able to send factories so much deal flow. It's harder to access the factory. Ask a trading company and say, hey, which factory is actually producing these products? And chances are, like, they aren't going to tell you. It's crazy to think that you aren't going to know where your products are being produced. So it's something to watch out for. And if something were to go wrong at the factory, you're going to have a lot of liability in question. The trading company can easily disappear. For them, it's a matter of just hiding away and potentially taking down their Alibaba site, not answering your emails, deleting a WeChat account. It's much easier for trading companies to disappear than factories. So, for the most part, I would not suggest working with trading companies. I mean, there are some that are relatively good that have access to some factories that don't have foreign representatives. But for the most part, 70% of the companies that are listed on Alibaba or these websites or even at these trade shows are going to be falling into this category of trading companies. So moving on to the next, do you have any questions about trading companies, by the way?
I think I just want to piggyback on what you were saying about identifying if it's a factory. One of the things I do is I'll schedule a call with the person at like 9 a.m. and have them give 9 a.m. their time, 9 p.m. my time. I'll be like, hey, can you give me a tour on video on Skype or Zoom? Can you give me a tour of your factory right now? And that's a real clear indication if they're in the factory or if they even have a factory. That helps us tremendously. The other thing I want to mention, which is not necessarily on the trade, I like going direct, right? I like actually finding the factory. And I think you're pro this as well, going direct to consumer, because I want to take as much upside as we possibly can. One of the things I do, and I made sure that we're completely honest with the factory, I made sure I have Chinese whiskey. I go to China physically. So one of the questions someone said is like, hey, do you go and visit the factories? Is a trip worthwhile? The answer is absolutely. Make sure you get like drunk or maybe a little bit tipsy, or make sure the factory manager is drunk or tipsy, and you'll get all the juice.
Yep. You're talking about the Baijiu, the Chinese whiskey.
Exactly. We have to make when people start here at the company, we make sure we on their first we memorialize their day with a shot of Chinese whiskey, and they'll never forget their first day.
That's awesome. So moving on to wholesalers, there are a lot of companies that are selling through Shopify or Amazon and using wholesalers. And the benefit here is a lot of times they have foreign representation. That's always nice. I mean, because then you don't have to deal with communication errors and translation and all of that. But at the same time, it's a higher price and you're going to pay for it. I mean, most wholesalers probably take an average of a 30 to 40, 50% margin. And there's no real factory that you have a connection with. And there's very little customization that you can do through a wholesaler unless they have their own facility, here in the States or in Europe, where you can add customizations to your product. And wholesalers can also be, brands. For example, we talk to these retailers at Sourcify that want to start creating their own private label brands because they're buying products at wholesale prices from brands like Nixon watches or Billabong board shorts or Rainbow flip-flops, and these retailers want to go direct to factory as well because they understand it can increase their margin by 30 to 50+%, which for the retail industry is incredible as they continue to get hit hard by the e-commerce stores.
And is that wholesaler typically represented in the United States? Is that what you're referring to, or wholesaler in China?
Foreign representative, usually in America, in the United States.
Got it. Cool.
So moving on, this is, really the factories is where you want to be, is who you want to be working with. And there is, a bit of a higher risk because sometimes the minimums can be higher, but your margin is always going to be higher. I mean, factories, you're going to get the factory direct price. I would say most factories make maybe 10% of what they make 10% margin of what they produce. And the kind of whole dynamic there that we see on the factory side of the table is all these factories are also looking to go direct to consumer. And so if you start seeing products on Amazon that are, somehow you think they're selling at an unbeatable or ridiculous price, it's probably because that factory has figured out how to sell directly on Amazon. And every time we go see factories, they're always asking, how directly to consumers. And so that's going to continue to be a trend that you'll see from factories. And so for you as an e-commerce entrepreneur, what you really need to focus on is understanding how I can create that brand equity. Because at the end of the day, if every factory can get access to Amazon and these other marketplaces, and Amazon has made efforts to expand that relationship in China with these factories, you're going to want to build that brand equity so you can, have a reason to sell at a higher price point. Depending on your payment terms, most factories, when you're starting out with them, you pay for inventory up front. Usually this works as a 30% down payment to start production. You can get a quality control check-in before you pay that remaining 70%. And usually, the sales rep will send you photos and hopefully give you updates as the production process goes through. But you're going to pay usually 100% down for inventory before the product's shipped. And as you grow with your factory, they'll give you better payment terms. And one of the things we're developing at Sourcify is Sourcify Capital, where we'll actually pay for the inventory for you and make money as you sell those products. So enabling you as an e-commerce entrepreneur to manage some of your cash flow. Another dynamic there is the production lead time. It's always crazy to me where some smaller e-commerce stores or first-time e-commerce entrepreneurs, don't understand that you can't go out and produce, 10,000 units in a day, like right off the bat with a new factory and a new product. There's always going to be a production lead time. I would say on average, you're going to want to estimate about a month. Depends on the product, depends on the specifications. But production lead time is something you always have to be aware of, because if your inventory levels are getting low, your sales data, your sales are ramping up, you've got to understand that lead time so you don't run out of inventory. And the most frustrating thing as an e-commerce entrepreneur is running out of inventory. I mean, imagine having customers and nothing to sell. Like that's the worst situation you want to be in. So understand your lead times and understand how you can plan ahead through your past sales data and inventory level so you never run out of inventory. Custom products, this is where factories come in 100%. I mean, we've seen some crazy products produced through factories, and I think that's probably one of the most fun things of working directly with the factories, being able to produce your own custom product and do whatever you want to that product.
One of the things that you said that resonated with me was the factory direct-to-consumer model that's been happening right now. I can tell you that not only myself, but many others are finding themselves competing directly with Chinese sellers on Amazon. There's about 50 new Chinese sellers on Amazon a day right now. That's how strong Amazon is recruiting Chinese sellers. So it goes back to kind of the first example, in my opinion, is that you want to solve a problem. If you're just coming out with a product that's just off the shelf, it's much easier for them to come in and just copy those products. So what we've been doing is we've been going after innovative product that has a higher tooling cost associated with it. So it creates more of a defensive position, giving us a much longer shelf life to the product as well, and giving us defensive position to actually being copied.
Exactly.
And we have a really interesting analysis. We're about to go live with it probably in a day or two. I've spent a lot of time while I was sick writing this, which is essentially what we can learn from the top Amazon sellers and how we can start copying them, just like the way that they've been copying us. Yeah. So anyway, be on the lookout for that. It's really, really fascinating, and we will continue.
And so now we're going to dive into some questions that I think you want to be asking yourself as you scale up and grow. I know a lot of big e-commerce entrepreneurs work with sourcing agents, and I'm going to give you like a quick example of Spikeball. It's probably the fastest growing outdoor game that is played on beaches across the world. I spoke to the founders of Spikeball, and their growth is incredible. I mean, but they were working with a sourcing agent to begin with because they didn't understand that dynamic in China, didn't understand their the plastic parts that went in their product. But for them, they give lifetime warranties on their product. The quality has to be extremely important. I mean, for them, they look at that whole cost, and it's an investment for them to actually put that much time into a product like that has a lifetime warranty. So for you want to ask yourself, as you're working with your sourcing agent, are they just providing quality control checks? Are they actually managing the relationship? What value are they providing? And if you come to a point where you feel like you know more about your factory and know more about the pieces and parts and materials that are going into your product, and chances are you've outgrown your sourcing agent. And so when I look at sourcing agents, it's a very segmented industry. People charge on different bases, like a flat fee, commission, mixture of the both. But really, you want them to create value up and down the supply chain. On the upside, I would say you want to have them help you sort specifications so your factory can really understand what's going on. On the downside, depending on who you're working with to import your products, they should be helping you through that process. And so I think a lot of sourcing agents, especially the traditional model where they aren't really results driven or action oriented, is gone. And I think as a seller that's ramping up, where you really got to watch your cash flow, it's not going to make sense to work with some of these old school sourcing agents anymore. But I will say there are some amazing agents out there that have a very specific industry experience. They've been doing that one product for dozens of years and really understand the ins and outs of their product. But at the end of the day, with any sourcing agent that isn't a part of your team or that isn't fueled through software, they aren't going to be as results driven and as streamlined as you want them to be. And there's also going to be culture connotations. If you have a middleman that's going to your factory and not necessarily directly correlated with your team, there could be some backdoor paybacks from the not paybacks but payouts from the factory to your sourcing agent that you might not even know about. And those are some of the scariest things that you see, where a factory is paying a sourcing agent behind your back and not being transparent with you. I think, if you're working with a sourcing agent, make sure they're transparent, make sure you know everything about the factory, and make sure you have price visibility. That's another thing I see is sourcing agents, they say, oh, this is the best factory for doing this product. And, I've been manufacturing these products for 15 years. And you as the e-commerce entrepreneur say, all right, great, you're the expert. Let's make that happen. But they don't shop around. They don't shop around to other factories to see your product because one of the most interesting stories we've seen with a cosmetics brand called Campari is that they, were starting to work with one factory that had already been doing cosmetic packaging for all the big brands through Sephora and those bigger retailers. And the factory was already flooded with orders. So for them, they weren't, hungry for new orders. They weren't hungry for new business. Whereas if you look at factories that, might not be producing for the big brands yet, they're going to be a lot more hungry to grow and a lot more hungry to find a client that they can grow with. And so that's something you got to keep in mind with. And I think a lot of times that's a misstep that some sourcing agents make.
One of the things you said was sourcing agent and transparency, which is funny to hear that in the same sentence. How do you make sure that the sourcing agent is transparent, and how do you make sure that, like, at least upfront that the person's getting kickbacks from the factory?
That they aren't getting kickbacks from the factory.
Or that they are or they aren't, right? If you want, if they are,
right.
Just be transparent about
it. It's hard to tell. I mean, honestly, you'll find out sooner or later. But right off the bat, I mean, I don't have a straight solution for that. I would say, you can use Sourcify instead of a sourcing agent because we're, 100 times better. But in terms of transparency, I would say, look, ask your sourcing agent those hard questions, difficult questions. Get them on the phone. Meet with them face to face if they're, in your city, and really try to understand what drives them, what motivates them. Because at the end of the day, these sourcing agents, the model that they have in their business model isn't necessarily sustainable over time. And you look at, big trading companies, even like Li and Fung, like the biggest trading company in Hong Kong, they're publicly traded on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Their business has been declining because they're basically a consultancy. They consult for Target and Walmart and all these big retailers, and they're exchanging, their time for money. And so as these retailers try to cut costs, they're realizing, hey, these sourcing agents actually have our best interests in mind, and they're either bringing those team members in-house where they're on payroll, or they're cutting them out completely and saying, hey, we aren't going to work with you anymore. We're going to actually go direct to a factory, grow our own, buying office or sourcing team, and create that own relationship with these factories ourselves. So it's an investment to go around a sourcing agent if you're already using one, and it can be scary to, step aside. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you right off the bat, you should never be single sourced. And I think that's one of the biggest missteps that we see any company make have to grow. Even Allbirds, they are the fastest growing shoe company in the world right now. They raised $20 million in VC money from San Francisco investors. And I was talking to these guys in Q4 last year, and they work with one Korean shoe factory. I'm like, hey, what happens if that Korean factory burns down? What happens if some horrific accident happens and they don't have a plan B? They might have some factories in the pipeline, but if you're producing hundreds of thousands of units a year, or even tens of thousands of units a year, and you don't have a plan B or plan C, you're going to be screwed. I mean, there's literally going to be probably a 3-month period where you're going to run out of inventory.
Redundancy is so important. But we'll talk about this later on, which is creating a baseline. So even if you are being outsmarted by a sourcing agent, you can create a baseline of what you believe the product should get other quotes and see what other people are actually quoting you, and just sample size it enough and have a large enough sample size so you can actually see if there's a lot of bloat in the price that you're getting.
Exactly.
The other thing with the sourcing agent that I think is interesting is, like, if you can find, like, let's just say you want to make toothpaste. Well, toothpaste to be made, especially in China, is very difficult. And so you may want to find a sourcing agent that's really, really focused on toothpaste. So that's where I think you're saying where a sourcing agent could come in, could be beneficial for your company.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it depends largely on your product category, I would say. And there are some product categories that, sourcing agents can add a lot of value in.
What would you say, and we'll get into your company a little more, but what would you say Sourcify is like top 3, like where you just absolutely crush it?
I would say apparel. Any apparel we can produce faster and better than anyone else. I would say watches, hats, socks, backpacks. Basically any soft consumer good we can do very fast. And we're starting to do more products that have injection molds or designed through a computer-aided design like a CAD.
Cool.
So, another kind of step that I want to dive into is your component costs. And what a lot of people don't realize, and it's crazy to me to really dive into, is that each factory has their own supply chain. A lot of times for you as the e-commerce entrepreneur, you're dealing with the assembly factory. And I'll give it a specific example of watches. With watches, you're dealing with the factory that actually assembles those watch parts, and the watch hands, the watch strap, the watch movement, all those little pieces come from individual smaller factories that this assembly factory has great relationships with. And so as you grow and as you scale up and as you look to cut costs, you're going to have to understand how those factories work together. And so one of the best ways to do that is start asking those bigger questions as you scale up. I would say, until you're producing over 50,000 units a year or more, it's not going to be worth it for you to deal with all these little smaller factories that make up those component costs. But it's something to keep in mind in the back of your head as you grow. So figure out how you can cut your manufacturing costs even further, because everyone knows in Asia it's so relationship driven. And so for these factories that have a growing client, the smaller factories might actually keep the same prices even if the orders go up. Whereas for you, if you go build that relationship directly with those smaller factories, the watch hand factory, the watch strap factory, you can help drive those costs down. So it's something that I always like to touch on, and something that I always like to see e-commerce entrepreneurs do as they grow, is try to cut their component costs. And so, we touched on these main points basically, but you've got to know which component costs you can lower. For example, if it's apparel, there's going to be the fabric mills, there's going to be the cut and sew factory. Every product that you can think of is going to be made up of, more than one factory, and the factory that you're dealing with is most likely the assembly factory.
So how do you figure out where you can cut costs and step into into the assembly factory and say, hey, are they going to give you a whole holistic picture of every part of the supply chain, or are you going to have to go source your own components and suggest them to the factory?
A factory's own supply chain is almost like assembly factory supply chain is like a magic box. Just as if I asked you, hey, where are you producing, that shirt or backpack for your company, you're not going to tell me your factory, because that's a huge barrier to entry for someone trying to get started. And so for these factories, it is hard to dive in and understand which smaller factories are producing which parts, and it's going to take some investment on the ground there. It's one of the things we do for larger clients at Sourcify as they want to cut costs, is actually figure out which feeder factories they're working with and figuring out how we can help them cut those smaller unit costs. But that's why that investment isn't going to make sense to put your time or effort into until you hit, I would say, an average of like 50,000 units in sales a year. So it's something that you want to keep in mind, but it's not a straightforward, hey, I'm going to go figure out all my component factories, where all my little parts are made, and go talk to each factory and start cutting costs bit by bit. It doesn't work like that. And so it takes some time, it takes an investment, and it's not a completely clear-cut solution or approach.
Cool.
So, moving forward, it sounds like most people on the webinar have been selling already, so you probably have your own methods of communication. One of the favorite tools that we're developing at Sourcify, one of my favorite tools that we're developing at Sourcify, is basically streamlining all that communication, so you don't have a ton of different channels to try to figure out where you said what. Because I remember 8 years ago when I was going into production for my first products, we'd be using email, WeChat, Skype, WhatsApp. I'd be going back and forth trying to figure out, where did I say that, or where did the sales rep say this, trying to figure out and put it all together. And so we're plugging into WeChat's API, WhatsApp's API, and enabling someone to actually have a streamlined communication feed and tools that enable them to understand, all right, the sample was supposed to be shipped on this date, production was supposed to start on this date, understanding those key components that actually make up your communication channels. And so right off the bat, keep it simple. I mean, everyone knows producing overseas, you're going to be dealing with sales reps where English is not their first language. So keep it simple. I usually like to use, numerical bullet points, and always try to know more than one employee. I mean, if you really are looking to build a relationship with this factory, it's like the startup scene in San Francisco. People jump to different factories very often, and usually the good factories try to keep a high retention rate with employees. But for some employees, if there's a better offer somewhere else, and even for us, like we have our own office in Guangzhou right now with 4 people, and so with that dynamic, like I'd say 3 out of the 4 of our people used to work at factories as sales reps, and so recruiting in China, money's going to talk anywhere, but it's something that you have to be aware of with these factories. And so just ask the employee that you're working with, you ask the sales rep that you're working with, say, hey, I want to get to know your factory better. Is there anyone else I can speak to just to, understand more about your company, more about what you do? And I just want a backup plan in case, you get sick or in case something happens to you. I love working with your factory. Just ask with the intention of building that relationship. Don't ask with the intention of screwing out this employee, because these employees, they get bonus for the sales that they bring in. They get commission on the sales that they bring in. And so, sometimes they could be a little bit taken aback by this question. So make sure you frame it as if you're trying to build a stronger relationship with this factory. And so usually with Sourcify, with the factories, the partner factories we work with, we have at least 2 employees that we communicate with, and then we know their management or factory boss as well. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's something that you should always understand.
Yeah, that's great. I do believe in humanizing the relationship. And I think it can pay a lot of dividends later on, where you can really convert the conversation from just a pure transaction to more of an interaction. Mm-hmm. So I'm always asking our employee in China, like, hey, how's your family, right? How's your child?
Right.
How's your husband? So I'm really always trying to personalize it. And I think that creates a lot more loyalty.
Exactly.
One thing I think we didn't cover, which I'd like to hear you talk about, is exclusivity, tooling exclusivity, sort of contracts, if any, NDAs.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a question that everyone sends my way, and there's no clear-cut answer. I would say if you want to create an exclusive product that your factory only produces for you, it's all in the relationship. Number one, NDAs or contracts, you're not going to want, or even it's not worth going to fight the legal battle against that in Asia or specifically in China. We've seen people do it before, and it's just very hard to fight a legal battle overseas. You can limit someone from importing those products by having, trademarks or patents here in America, where, you probably know about taking people off the Amazon marketplace better than I do about them copying your product. But at the end of the day, with these factories, it's the relationship. And so, for example, touching back on when I invented the first leather watch strap without holes, that zip tie strap that we made, the factory that we started working with, they literally created those plastic injections, the notches that went in the strap that used to catch on the buckle, in their friend's factory right above them. And so for us, we were very, we took a lot of time to build that relationship and ensure that this factory was actually producing those products just for us. And so I wouldn't say there's a clear-cut approach to it. I mean, contracts, NDAs, all of that are important. But if your product becomes viral, like, for example, those fidget spinners, I knew some of the original guys that were doing the fidget spinners. They started out doing about $350,000 in sales. And as that spread like wildfire, they just couldn't sustain those sales because they couldn't compete on price. When all these factories and trading companies started going direct through these marketplaces, their margin just got diminished. They got destroyed. And they went from doing, almost $500K probably in their best month to, tens of thousands of dollars a month. And so it's something you have to, really consider as you put your product out there, is understand how you can protect it. I would say, it's important to have some legal relationship with your factory, but at the end of the day, fighting a legal battle overseas is not going to be worth your money.
One of the things I do to prevent like backdoors, I really just try to have a tooling agreement in place, especially if it's a unique product. If it's just like off the shelf that anyone can buy, there's no way to protect it. Right. And that's why I'm saying if you invest in higher quality product that's unique, you create more of a defensive position.
Exactly.
All right. So in terms of getting a discount on invoices when paying overseas suppliers, what we've been doing internally, and this strategy has switched a little bit, but we started paying our Chinese suppliers in renminbi. So last year we made like 6 figures extra on our bottom line because we actually started paying the supplier in the native currency. So the dollar was going up over time, and it was great to actually pay them in renminbi. So we forced them to actually quote us in renminbi versus US dollars, because if you quote in renminbi, they don't have to actually convert it back to US dollars. They'd always kind of bake something else into that price. So we've been capitalizing on this currency fluctuation. And now what's happening is that the US dollar is starting to come down. So now we're trying to say, okay, suppliers, we're going to start paying you in US dollars instead. But especially on the switch, when we were paying them in renminbi, we were saving on processing fees, especially wiring in the native currency. Right. And we were getting a lot better payment terms.
I think it's important. I mean, you guys probably do this too. You ask for the price in renminbi and in USD.
Yeah, you should do that up front. But essentially deciding on how you're going to pay is even more important. And if you can actually start tracking, like we have somebody in-house that's tracking the currency fluctuations to see how we can actually capitalize on those, is very important. And not a lot of other sellers are doing that today.
What kind of, I want to ask, before we dive into this, do you have any special ways that you guys use to pay factories? I mean, what's your main mode of payment? Is it just through your bank wire, or use any online?
So right now we use it's a Amex FXIP to do the wire transfers. I think we're getting charged $10 a wire, or I think it's $5 if it's native. But I used to use Chase, which was $25 a wire. And we're doing so many wires, we're starting to really add up over time.
Right, exactly.
Do you have any recommendations for wiring money?
We partner with a blockchain technology called Wire. It's WYRE. And so we handle our payments through them. We will be creating our own solution, probably through blockchain, to send wires faster and cheaper than anyone else. But, right now, I think that is one of the biggest pain points for any e-commerce entrepreneur, anyone producing overseas, is figuring out, how to send money effectively abroad.
Totally. So yeah, I think I have a good solution. You guys can check it out. The other thing, I think we were talking about, like baselining to understand what's happening, like the quote that you're getting from your supplier or your sourcing agent or whoever you're buying from, to know, like, is it a legit quote? Everyone always wants to know, like, am I getting hoodwinked or bamboozled, right? Am I paying the right price for product, or am I just paying, is it super, super bloated? Right. And that could be a result of, if you're at a trading company, it could be a result of maybe someone getting some kickbacks, et cetera. So what's one way that we use internally is, like, let's just take the example of a dog leash. So if you use Google Translate it into Chinese, and you're going to pick Chinese traditional. Essentially 1688.com is like Alibaba. It's just like a massive marketplace, but really traditionally used by Chinese people that are native in the country, and everything's in Chinese. So I like to put the dog leash into 1688.com, and you'll see the pricing immediately of what they're charging in yuan. So you can go back to Google, handy dandy, and find the baseline of what that price is to the US dollar. And so now you can really figure out, like, a baseline of what your product costs versus what you're being charged, and just figure out, like, am I overpaying or underpaying? If there's no other alternative on the market to you, try to find something that's a little bit similar.
Right, exactly. And I think 1688, it's owned by Alibaba as well. It's kind of like the B2C marketplace of China, and they're growing like crazy over there. It is a great way to understand baseline pricing, because, some of these foreign trading companies are going to take their own margin and jack up the price. So it enables you to have some price visibility, like you're saying.
Cool.
So diving in here, I think we're wrapping up and going to open it up for Q&A. But, really, it's always fascinating to me to kind of break down the manufacturing world as a balance between price, quality, and lead time. And people always want to produce at a lower price. They always want the quality to be the best, and they always want the lead time to be, as fast as possible. And so it's a dynamic that you have to understand, because if you aren't willing to pay a premium for high quality products, then your products aren't going to be produced to a certain standard. And so it goes hand in hand, and it's a certain formula that you have to figure out for your own business. Some companies are going to produce lower quality products and just go for a smaller margin, whereas other ones are actually going to invest, in creating a quality product like a spike ball, and really grow their brand through quality customer service and products. So it's an interesting dynamic, and there's no clear cut solution to it. But I will say it's something you want to keep in mind as you grow your store.
And for me, I am notoriously known for trying to get the best price always. So when I approach my factory and say, hey, you're charging us $5 for this, we want to really see this at $3.75, think about what happens with this equation here. So our price may go down, but guess what else goes down as well, right? Quality. So they may use a different fabric, or they might use a different plastic. They may use recycled plastic, who knows? But they are literally taking that out of your own price. If you think you're actually getting something of higher quality for the same price, it's changing.
Exactly.
So this is a very interesting conversation. Recently I got my business audited, not by the IRS, but I was trying to get feedback on how I can do things to actually improve. Right? What can I do that will have a direct increase on my bottom line? And getting your vendor to ship direct to FBA is interesting, especially for me, because I'm in a 3PL environment. I'm in an outsourced warehouse environment. Everything comes to my warehouse in New Jersey, and then we prep it, we label it, we pack it for FBA as we need to. But the idea is that right now it's kind of going into this triangle, right? It goes from China to my warehouse in New Jersey, not even on the West Coast, on the East Coast. Then they prep it, they charge me for that. They label it, they charge me for that. Then I have to pay an extra shipping going to Amazon FBA, which increases the lead time. So one of the problems that we've been solving here at Skubana is, number one, is now, since we actually just launched FBA workflow on our platform where you can actually do FBA through Skubana, but on top of that is, how could you actually hand off your FBA prep to the Chinese factory? So I've been working on this. I've also been working on finding the right pricing to get this and to find people that actually can get it done. And we're just about to announce Skubana-powered FBA logistics, which is essentially, we will actually do door-to-door from your factory in China directly to FBA. If you're interested, you can email me at chat@skubana.com. That's not the point of this. The point is how can you find efficiencies in your business? So the good about doing this is essentially you're using offshore labor to do the FBA prep, and you save on lead time, and you also save on the prepping costs as well associated with it. So there's more of a logistical, I don't want to say madness, but we're developing what's called a standard operating procedure so that there's a complete process involved so that our Chinese factories know how to do this and we know how to do this. Now, there is downside to this. There's a lot of people are like, wait a minute, you want my factory to send directly to Amazon, but then what happens? You're telling your factory who technically your customer is if you're an Amazon seller. And I mean, for me, how I justify this, and I've been afraid of this or fearful of this for a long time, is, yeah, you are telling your vendor who your customer is, but it's no secret who your customer is. Like, these suppliers already know that Amazon is just a beast, near monopoly in the United States. And so they already know that you're sending it over there. And then the ugly is essentially you're kind of giving them training on how to be you. And so you have to really protect yourself so you're not cut out of the equation. And I think that's where relationships come in handy. Because as you mentioned earlier on the call, that factory to consumer going direct on Amazon has become a real thing.
Exactly. I mean, that's a huge point that you made right there. And it's something that, I'm excited to see your guys' service launch. I think it's going to add so much value for Amazon sellers and sellers in general, because it is a huge, question that you have to keep top of mind as these factories try to go direct to these marketplaces. How do you protect your products? And I think this is one of the ways.
Cool. Something to look at, guys, just something to consider is going direct from your factory to FBA. Figuring it out is the hard part. And if you need help figuring it out or need some inputs or want even a quote on shipping, you just let me know. Skubana is really an operations platform, but I was thinking to myself, how do we, if it's just a railroad or if it's a cart on a railroad track, how do we expand our competencies and offer our customers more? And this is one way to do that in a very effective way.
So, at the end of the day here, I think e-commerce comes down to the numbers and the brand. Your numbers have to make sense to scale up and to create that brand equity. So one of the most simple equations that I always run down is the profitability. How do you know you're going to be running a profitable company? And it's really just the sale price minus unit cost minus your cost per acquisition. Your CPA costs are going to be variable. Unit costs you can hopefully decrease over time. Your sale price, as you grow that brand equity, you can hopefully increase over time, and that's going to make you profit as an e-commerce entrepreneur. So run the numbers for your own company. Understand how you can grow and how you can take this profit to reinvest your money and hopefully make a return for your business. Because I think at the end of the day, you see some entrepreneurs that are starting and diving into products that don't add up and don't make sense. And so it's something that you have to analyze and always keep top of mind. And especially as, CPA costs and CPC costs that fall into that whole category are rising, you have to understand, how can I either increase my sale price or lower my unit cost? On the unit cost side, and that's something we can help you with at Sourcify. We can dive in your component costs. We can break down actually what goes into your product, because chances are you're working with just an assembly factory. And on the sale price, that comes down to the brand equity that you're creating. How does Movement Watches, as an example, sell a $100 watch where they're producing it for about $10, and you have all these number costs that are using alloy instead of stainless steel and selling those watches on other marketplaces for $5? How do they get so many customers? I mean, they've sold over $100 million in watches in the last 5 years, and it's fueled through their brand equity. I mean, that's really the key to this equation, is understanding how you can charge a premium for your product and continue to figure out how you can manage your CPAs as these CPC costs are rising, lower unit costs, and hopefully increase your sale price through brand equity.
And I wish I had those margins.
Yeah.
Damn.
I know, it's incredible. And so, at Sourcify, for us, for myself as an e-commerce entrepreneur, having brought dozens of my own products to market, creating everything from, simple hats and sunglasses to injection molded products, we're always going to have an e-commerce entrepreneur's back. We don't make money from the factory side of the table. We build these relationships. Right now we work with 700 factories around the world, not only just in China, but in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, India, Pakistan, and Mexico. And it's incredible to see the different dynamics of the supply chain in each country. It's incredible to see the amount of money we can, save someone going into production, because, a lot of times people look at their companies and say, hey, I can lower my CPA costs by working with this digital marketing firm. And they don't even think about lowering the costs of their supply chain, lowering their unit costs. And so that's really where we come in. We're here to help you. It's pretty simple. You can just go on our website, www.trysourcify.com. You can use the promo code Skubana for $100 off your first sourcing project. All you have to do is submit your project. It will come right to our team. We'll analyze it. We'll see how we can help you. And hopefully we're able to help you save your unit costs and improve your supply chain.
That's awesome. One of the bonuses that we're giving away is essentially $100 off to Prosper Show tickets. Prosper Show is the biggest Amazon seller conference in, I believe, the world right now. We'll have about 1,500 people at the show. We did sell out last year. So essentially we're giving out $100 off Prosper Show tickets. All you need to do is just go and apply to skubana.com/prosper2018, and we'll hook you up. It's coming right up, March 13th to the 14th. I will be there. You'll be there, Nathan. We'll be there to support you guys. If you have any questions, needs, comments, if you really liked what you heard today, please come up to us and say hello. And we're going to get right into the Q&A right now. There's a lot of questions that came in. So if you guys don't mind, I know we're hitting right up on the hour. Nathan, do you have about 10 minutes to
Yeah, let's do it. Let's dive in real quick. Feel free to continue to ask questions. I mean, ask good ones too. I like hard ones.
So it looks like we've had a lot of questions come in, and I'm just going to start firing them off here. Some of them we've already answered. So here is, let's see, recourse. When someone has a huge deposit and the quality control person finds unacceptable flawed quantities.
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to be a big question. And that comes down to working with the right factories. You're fortunate enough to have gone in and placed that QC check before you had to put down the remaining payment that you owe the factory. But now it's a matter of negotiating and going back and forth with the factory to see how you can improve those products. Sometimes it's not as hard as you may think to improve the products that have defects. If it is, it might be a loss, or hopefully you can get a discount on that next order. That's really one of the hardest questions, and I think that comes down to why you have to work with the right factories, because putting down that down payment to start production is a gamble sometimes if you don't know who you're working with, and you got to have your checks and balances in place to ensure that that doesn't bite you in the ass, basically. It could be a huge problem. It could make it so you lose a ton of money in your production run, because if the factory produces products that aren't of quality standards or don't meet your specs, it's not going to make sense for you to sell, and it's going to be very hard for you to get your money back.
Put this way, once you actually wire the funds 100%, you won't see those funds again. So make sure, one of the things that I do is I make sure to get 10 or 15 samples in advance of actually placing the order, and I'll pay full price for them. They may upcharge me on it, but I don't really care, because essentially I'll have like a filter party and show the filters to everybody and just get feedback on those samples. Two is one of the other things I think we didn't talk about today, which is really getting the factory to give you the lowest min you possibly can. And so I just try to really get them down on the lowest min. Like if they're like, hey, 3,000, I'm like, how about 300? And they'll say, well, 500. All right, you got a deal.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's one of the things I want to just touch on, that kind of negotiation standpoint. We didn't talk about negotiations today, but factories in Asia are notorious for just going highballing people, whether it be on the IMOQ or on the price. And so you have to lowball them and meet in the middle. That's going to be a goal, is find that lower echelon point that you can negotiate with.
Awesome. Now Abu wrote, do you only source from factories in China? I think we got that answer. You source all over. What about patent products in America versus having it made in China? Is this high risk for taking your product and making against our company?
What was the patent thing?
Let's say, what about patent products in America having made?
Oh, got it. So here's the thing with products that are patented in America. Your American patent doesn't have any legal meaning in China, and so for you're going to be able to protect your patent at border control, and so you can make them aware that your product is patent pending, that it has a patent, and so they can hopefully catch the products that are being imported that infringe on your patent, but you don't have any legal protection on your patent from United States Patent and Trademark Office overseas.
Sam Kim wrote, can you comment on liability risks working directly with manufacturers, specifically in trade dress and using brand, trademark, keyword, and sponsored ads? If you want, I can answer that.
Yeah, go for it.
So essentially, first of all, you're completely liable as the brand manufacturer, even though the factory is making it. Once you import it in under your company name, you actually take ownership of that product, and you're completely liable for any infringement or liability that happens with your factory, which is why you need to have a really, really good insurance plan, a product liability or business policy, BPO, or I forgot what it's called, but product liability insurance, essentially. And essentially using brand, trademark, keywords in your sponsor ads, you're actually allowed to do that. You just can't use the brand in the back-end keywords, but you could advertise on branded keywords using Amazon sponsored ads. All right, keeping it going here. Quality goes south if the order is not completed before the Chinese New Year. Learn the hard way. Thank you, Jan. Should I trademark my product prior to importing?
That's a good question. What I would say is you can add the TM mark on your product, so you can have that first right to claim it. But filing for a trademark honestly isn't that hard and isn't too expensive. I think as a small business it costs like $235. Is that right? Or it's under $300, I know. That's not too hard to do. I think really the only thing you need to consider with the trademark is make sure you have that product category correct through the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So spend some time researching that. But if you have under $250 to invest in a trademark and you're serious about your product and think it has IP around it, then it could make sense to make that little investment to get started.
And if you are already an established brand selling, I would suggest you make sure you have a trademark on your name and a trademark on your logo. The other thing that we started noticing is that people in China were trademarking our brand in China. Like they were like trademark trolls. So if that happens, we actually disputed it and actually won. So essentially, if somebody has a trademark on your brand in China, they can actually hold it up at the port. So just something to be very, very conscious of.
Mm-hmm.
Here, Mark writes, if I have a high dollar injection mold, should I send it to China to manufacture? And what is the best practice to minimize risk?
I would ask, is the mold already here in America or is it in China? If it's in China, you should probably just get the parts, the product made over there and then ship it out here in bulk. The other option is to bring the mold over here. But I would say, just knowing the labor rates and the differences between labor costs in America and China, it's always going to be cheaper in China.
Totally. Now, once America starts to invest more in technology where it can automate a lot of the manual stuff that China is doing, that dynamic may change as we go forward. The next question, the follow-up from Mark, really, and I'll take this one, is if have produced one product and brought to market, when is the best time to start refocusing on the second product as a startup with limited funding? So the way that we've scaled now to 1,000 products across 20 channels is actually doubling down and reinvesting our profits back into the business. That was the only way we can do it. Taking that money off the table and putting it back into a new product, because essentially if you've hit a gold mine and essentially you don't have a patentable product, people are going to copy it. So the window of opportunity for a product, the product window or the Amazon product death cycle, if we're just focusing on Amazon, is extremely short, which is, I think, is why your point is so well taken, Nathan, of actually building a brand. Mm-hmm. It's so important and it's very, very difficult to pull off. The slides and video will be sent to everybody after the webinar. Thank you for asking. Let's see what else here. Oh, essentially, Ryan commented, which is a good point. He commented that essentially, if you do Amazon FBA, if you do factory to Amazon FBA, you're actually letting Amazon know who your Chinese manufacturer is. And I think that's a really good point. They are the private label company that nobody is talking about. And many times, I mean, they're actually launching product very, very rapidly at a very fast clip. Certainly,
yeah, this is something I can touch on too. I mean, we've spoken to Amazon actually about their private label program and Wish.com and Top Hatter and all these big marketplaces, are going to be creating their own private label brands. I mean, for them, it's a matter of controlling and starting to make money on the supply side of their business. And some sellers are going to start competing directly with Amazon. I mean, it's kind of scary to think about, but I think at the end of the day, you guys have, or sellers, like us, we have the community, we have the community behind us. And I think it's just something to keep in mind as Amazon and other marketplaces invest in their own private label brands, because going head to head with, Amazon private label brand is going to be pretty challenging.
Totally. Richard Atkins is just talking about inventory management and managing inventory levels with lead times. That's one of the things I think Skubana kills it in, because we algorithmically will create a purchase order at the right time, at the right place, with the right quantity, at the right lead time, with the right means awaiting your approval with a nice little bow on top. And it never takes a lunch break. It's fantastic. Kenny writes, you can take this one, Nathan. What is your opinion about attending the Canton Fair? Is it worth it?
I would say it's a great experience. It's fun. But I would say that probably like 75 or more % of the companies or the factories that are at the Canton Fair are actually trading companies or wholesalers. And I think fewer and fewer good factories actually go to the Canton Fair. My team's been going for the past few years, and it is the experience to see the scale of it. I mean, it's literally the biggest manufacturing trade show in the world, and you can produce or find someone that will produce anything there. But in terms of building a relationship there, number one, all these sales reps that are at these booths are just so tired from so many different potential customers that it is, an amazing experience. But I would say if you're going to the fair, take some steps to prepare and actually look at factories that are going to be there. You can go on the Canton Fair website and see what companies are going to be present at the fair and what booths they'll be at, and even start building a relationship or contacting them before you go and set up meetings ahead of time. Because if you want to stick out and build a relationship as a buyer from these factories, you're going to want to start to do that before you go to the fair.
And we're actually heading, I haven't been to China in about 4 years, so I'll be heading to China coming up to speak at Global Sources. And we're going to be going to the Canton Fair. We're actually going to be inviting a lot of people that are in the Skubana audience in the community to come with us. So look out for that in our newsletter. Let's see what else is happening here. I actually find a lot of value in going to the Canton Fair just because it gives me some ideas. I know there's a lot of trading companies that are there, and I just want to go and experience it again. It's been a long, long time. Jan writes to you, Nathan, thanks for this. Hope to see you at ASD, Las Vegas.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be speaking at Sourcing Direct there.
Nick says, any recommendations on how to overcome companies who are copycatting my product and then purchasing fake reviews to compete with my legitimate reviews?
I'll let you take this one. Yeah.
So I would just report it to Amazon. They're very, very quick about this. I mean, one of the things that I think Amazon prides itself in is being social proof and having a platform that people can trust. So if you're seeing this, Nick, definitely report it. If you're brand registered, it even is that more important to be reporting it. If it doesn't get solved, you can always email me. I'm happy to help out. Next one is Richard. Fake reviews. Isn't A9 algorithm going to start cracking down on that? Yes, they are, and they have been, and they will continue to be cracking down on fake reviews. Thank you for sharing that. And that takes us to 3:15. We did an hour and 15 minutes. I think that's good. If anybody has questions, Nathan, how can people find you?
You can just go to trysourcify.com. Feel free to reach out. info@trysourcify.com. If it's real important, you can hit me up directly. It's Nathan@trysourcify.com, and on Twitter as well, Nathan Resnick.
Cool. And I'm Chad at Skubana. Guys, thank you for joining us. Over and out. Thank you so much for all your time.